What's going on, gamers? I am merkaba18. Today we are diving into a new build guide for Deep Rock Galactic Survivor. This is a roguelike, survivor-like that just got an update to all of the overclocks. They did a pass in terms of damage and number buffs. They've reworked a number of the overclocks, and they have implemented some quality of life changes like getting a chest at the end of each wave when you kill the elite based on how fast you kill them. Lots of really cool stuff. Recommend you check out the patch notes for the details on those statistics. But I spent most of the weekend and the last week since the release of this patch doing some testing, and some new interesting builds have emerged. So we're going to set those up for you, starting with this one right now, which is for the
one step closer to mastery.
Tinkerer Engineer. The Tinkerer Engineer, as you can see here, is going to start with the shotgun and has access to construct weapons. The big bonus really for them is that they gain a bunch of XP and pickup radius, and all of their weapons start at level 3. So you're starting out pretty close to your overclocks right out of the gates for this character. Now let me show you.
Isn't it?
Right there. You start with the Warthog, and that is going to start with kinetic damage. Now, there's a lot to talk about with this particular build. There's a lot of changes that have been made to this build. It was already pretty strong. It is now close to one of the most effective builds, if not the meta build. There'll be a couple of others that I'll put videos out for, so watch for those here on YouTube, across the social media platforms. We also stream this game live across all of our platforms constantly. Always checking out new updates and testing and doing challenges, so hope to see you in there. So Warthog is a very, very interesting gun. It starts with, we're going to go through each gun and each priority in terms of stats for those guns, and then we'll talk about why the build kind of comes together into something super strong. So with the Warthog, it starts with a very, very slow fire rate and a very high reload speed, meaning it's going to reload really, really quickly, but fire relatively short. And it only fires in front of you at the beginning. So at first glance, this weapon doesn't feel like it's going to be all that strong until you make some changes to it. So let's talk about priorities for this particular gun. So you're going to start with fire rate is the top priority. Anytime you can get fire rate, you want to increase the fire rate. Number 2, you want to choose overclocks as quickly as possible. So you want to get to 6, 12, and 18 as fast as possible with this weapon. I personally recommend, and you can choose whatever path you want to, I personally recommend overclocking one weapon all the way to the end and then moving on to the next one. Avoid, at least until most of your specified overclock choices are made, avoid sweeping things that do crit or crit damage or crit chance, things like that. You do obviously want to focus on some health and all those things. Mining speed is going to be important, movement speed, but you really do want to emphasize those overclocks because those are going to help you survive longer, do more damage. Top priority here. So first things, fire rate, right? You want to get that as high as you can. Almost every choice you make with fire rate. Then you want to choose the overclock that allows it to turn into a plasma weapon. And the reason for that is that when it turns into plasma, the projectiles will now bounce off of walls, off of enemies, etc., so that they are continuing to be effective. Plasma is a must for this weapon in most cases. You make a case for going with electric, it's just not as effective until the very end when you choose the second requirement for this gun, which is that it also shoots backwards. Now, if you end up in a situation with the electric, don't necessarily give up, but you do want to avoid a scenario where it stays kinetic. That is the must avoid. If you make it kinetic, it's just not as effective within this build, at least. There are definitely other builds that take advantage of that. But you want that plasma. You want it to shoot in front of you and behind you. The overclock for that is the one at the very end that does not take the damage penalty. And then there's a secondary choice oftentimes related to damage and reload or fire rate and reload. Or for another example is that it can have range. Anytime that you see fire rate and damage, you want to choose that rather than fire rate and reload because it has a fast reload automatically. So ideally, you're at high fire rate. Keep the reload speed relatively same where it is. It doesn't need any changes. You want plasma. You want it to shoot behind you and in front of you. And you want it to take range is even an effective option if you have that option. Very, very simple, straightforward build with that one. For your second weapon, you probably want to, this is just based on my preference and my build, but not all of these are going to work out exactly in this order based on your ability to re-roll and stuff like that. Just try to, as best you can, and focus on the other 3 weapons as a general rule. The other 3 weapons within this build are all plasma weapons, except for the shock fence. So top priorities are shock fence number 2, breach cutter number 3, and then shard diffractor as your final weapon. So in an ideal world, you would do them in that order. Warthog all the way to 18, shock fence to 18, breach cutter to 18, and then shard diffractor to 18. With the shock fence, this is a weapon that got a major overhaul with these new overclocks. Let me kind of show you what that looks like so that you can see it. With the shock fence, you want the top priority every single time is the... Actually, it doesn't have an image of it. I don't know how. We're going to show you some gameplay of this as well, this build in action. But the shock fence, you want to focus on getting these 3 overclocks whenever possible. You want the one that picks up your XP for you, top priority, because it really unlocks this build and continues to cascade some XP for you, particularly as we move forward into Endless Wave mode whenever that comes out. That's going to be very vital and very important. You want the one that either slows enemies or the one that allows it to explode upon expiration. So ideally, those would be you want XP pickup first, slowing effect, or exploding on expiration. And then the final choice is not always going to appear, but the final priority is the one that turns your fence into a pentagram and deploys all 5 of the shock fences at once. You'll see this in action as in the gameplay part of this, but basically what ends up happening is shock fence works the opposite direction, opposite way that typical turrets or constructs work. Typically you have to stand still to deploy like the LMG platform or the Krakoa, the fire turret. But in this case, you have to be moving in order for it to deploy. And typically, it just puts one down as you're moving and creates like a literal shock fence of 1 by 1 straight lines. With that final overclock that deploys all of them at the same time, it's going to turn it into a pentagram and deploy all of them at the same time. But it's going to crank down the reload speed, meaning it's going to be so slow that most of the time you're going to only have one set of 5 out at a time. Now, if you just leave it alone, it's relatively effective, especially within the context of this build. It's going to do its job, so for the most part, you can just kind of leave that where it is. But what makes it even better and like turns this into a meta build, in my opinion, is when you crank reload speed. After that final upgrade, when you move your reload speed down under a second and a half or a second, what happens is you instead of deploying the 1 by 1 fence, you're deploying a 5 by 5 fence, which 5x's the damage essentially. And it's kind of bananas. It fries. It really just shatters everything. So top like we talked about the overclock priorities. The top stat priority for this weapon is reload speed. You just have to crank as much reload speed as possible because that final overclock is going to slow it down even more. So you have to get that as far as you can. Things like reload speed all are great choices in this one because you're going to want reload speed for everything but the Warthog. Now, the other 2 weapons, the variety of choices is kind of really up to you. Those first 2 do have very specific priorities in terms of overclocks. The breach cutter, you really want to do crank reload speed. You want extra beams. You want things like you can turn it into a burn weapon so that as it passes through and does damage to groups, it lights them on fire with a burn effect. That's a really, really effective one. And the final one that I would recommend is that when it expires, it splits into plasma balls that will dissipate and then continue to do and apply burn damage. When you put all of those things together, you basically end up with like continuing fire, especially if you get the reload speed fast enough. It'll fire another one before the previous one has been fired. So you're basically just getting a constant wave of burn and plasma damage. So breach cutter reload speed is top priority. Then in terms of overclocks, the only 2 that you really, really have to make this build as best it can be is turn it into burn damage and splits into fire plasma. And then for the shard diffractor, you're primarily doing this as a way to augment and take advantage of some of the later choices that we're going to talk about in a second. Really, the only one that you have to have is reload speed. If you can get extra beams, like legendary extra beam choices or choices in your overclocks, that's going to really help unlock some major damage. And then you want to just crank that damage after that once its reload speed is set at or under 1.5 seconds. So when you put all of those together, what you can then do is, if let's say in a endless world mode, or where you're getting all of these priorities exactly how you want them, then you can start to crank things like all reload speed, or all plasma damage, or all status effect and burn damage. And then once you get that set, you're going to deploy 5x shock fences everywhere you walk. It's going to shatter and pick up all the XP for you. The other weapons are going to bounce off walls and hit everything else, and it's just going to shatter and destroy single targets. It's going to destroy groups, and it just really kind of goes wild. Now, this particular build does not necessarily take advantage of any very required artifacts. You know, there's crit builds that have to have the squinties, or there's, you know, the beam builds, you really want that status effect one. You know, just choose standard choices like weapon box, pay to win, mocap, salty pretzel, anything that like helps you. Just generally the good artifact choices that you could make. Scanners are really good. Any of those are really going to help you. This build kind of stands on its own. It doesn't have any artifact requirements. Those are the kind of priorities I would choose. I hope you enjoyed this gameplay of this, and I will see you again. We're going to put out 2 or 3 more builds, and we're going to continue to test this. Make sure you hit that sub button and follow along in the live streams, and I hope to see you over there. Thank you so much for watching. Gain level. Lifetime. Status damage.
I can use this.
Maybe.
Let's show them some
The
power.
scanner just lit up like a Christmas tree. We got a swarm incoming.
That's what I needed.
Keep in mind, too, that they're all picking up my XP as we go. Like, each of the shock fences is picking up XP.
The swarm's heading your way. Load up.
Hell yes. Points on it. Say hello to my little friend.
Build guide will go up for this over the weekend, by the way, so you guys can have it. Pick up radius.
Bunga. Hell yes. One down. Give it
Oh,
to me.
plasma damage? Yes, please.
Eat blood. Hell yes. You're cute, but you're dead.
Nope.
Get it wrapped up, miner. The longer you stay, the harder it gets. All tasks complete.
And reload.
Extra special.
The drop pod is prepped and ready. Get on it before it leaves.
Go to hell.
So you can kind of see, and we haven't even finished the overclocks on the other two, you can kind of see how it all comes together there.